Joining us from Newsmax, New York, we welcome Alan Dershowitz, Harvard Law School professor and author of the book, The Case Against the Iran Deal. Alan, domestically, can you make the case for this early release of an estimated 100,000 prisoners? How is this going to work out legally?
Well, it's a bandaid on a big problem. We are the most over-confined country in the world. We confine more people in prison than any Western democracies. We have far too many people. The sentences are far too long. And this is a bandaid to a very, very large problem. Now, inevitably, among the thousands who are released, there are going to be some who will recidivate, and so there'll be criticism for that.
Well, let's boil it down. Recidivate means they will return to a life of crime, correct? In layman's
maybe
terms?
the same crime, maybe other crimes. Yeah, but inevitably, when you have a large population, there will be some who will commit crimes again. So it's not a risk-free process. On the other hand, there are so many people in prison today for sentences that are far too long in proportion to the crimes they committed, particularly nonviolent offenders, personal drug users, college kids who sold drugs, kids from the inner city who may be part of a drug culture. So I think it's a step in the right direction, but it's not a surgical step. It's a kind of blunderbuss step.
Well, and you say a blunderbuss step. I think it's an executive action in Congress right now. There's a bipartisan criminal justice reform bill. Would it have been better to wait on that bill to pass?
Well, the Constitution provides two ways of dealing with this. One, the president does have the authority in federal cases to commute, pardon, and do whatever it takes to free people from prison. Of course, Congress has the authority to legislate and to apply its legislation retroactively to people who are in prison. This requires a far more systematic approach, and what I think should happen is Congress should set up yet another committee, but a committee of experts, to look at how to redraft legislation to cut down the number of people who are needlessly in prison today. Remember, the person who suffers when they're in prison is not only the prisoners, but family members. They go on welfare. Prison is very expensive to the country. It's necessary. We live in a country with a lot of violence, but there are too many people in prison for nonviolent crimes today as well.
Minute 30 remains. Let's turn our focus to international law, at least in a sense. President Obama apologizing to the group Doctors Without Borders in the wake of that airstrike, an airstrike that our military says was called in by our Afghan allies. Was the president right to do that?
I think it's right to apologize for a mistake, but the president also ought to apologize to Israel for too quickly condemning Israel when, in the fog of war, Israel may have done something much like that. Remember, when you have terrorists who hide among civilians, it's going to be inevitable that there will be some civilian casualties. That's the nature of this kind of warfare. It's deliberate. Done by the terrorists. They purposely hide among civilians in order to get democracies like the United States and Israel in defending themselves and trying to protect their soldiers. Inevitably, there are going to be some events like this, but apologies are appropriate as long as it's coupled with corrective action to make sure it doesn't happen again if it can be stopped.
And, of course, that was the criticism that some of the insurgents were hiding out in or around that hospital. At any rate, Alan Dershowitz. Go ahead very quickly. Last statement.
No, even if they weren't hiding in and around the hospital, that's their tactic. They hide among civilians in order to induce fire at civilians. That's part of the tactic and strategy. We have to be smarter than they are.
Fair enough. Alan Dershowitz, thank you very much for your time. Again, the name of his book is The Case Against the Iran Deal. More on national security and foreign involvement. A close call in the air over Syria between U.S. and Russian airplanes. Fred Fleitz and Mike Pregent analyze what has happened and what may be ahead as Newsmax Prime moves on this Wednesday night.